Welcome to the Therapy Show podcast. I'm your host, Lisa Mustard. In each episode, I interview a seasoned and knowledgeable talk therapist from the counseling world to glean valuable insights, techniques, and tools that you can apply to your practice and your life. And if you're considering a career in the counseling field or just want to hear about what it's like to be a talk therapist, then this is the podcast for you. On today's episode, I am talking with Joe Sanok about big ideas, growing a private practice, and how to work less hours yet make more money. Joe Sanok is a keynote and TEDx speaker, business consultant, and podcaster. He has the #1 podcast for counselors, the Practice of the Practice podcast. He is a writer for PsychCentral, has been featured on the Huffington Post, Forbes, Good Magazine, Reader's Digest, Entrepreneur on Fire, and Yahoo News. Joe is the author of 5 books and has been named the Therapist Resource, top podcast, consultant, and blogger. And today on the show, Joe shares his background, how the practice of the practice started, and some tips for creating your dream job and life. And speaking of big ideas, I want to dedicate this episode to my favorite cousin, Eric Gertz, who always encouraged me to go after the things in my life that lit me up. You are loved and will be missed, cuz. Okay, let's get to the show. Hey, everybody. Welcome to this very special episode of the Therapy Show. I'm your host, Lisa Mustard. You guys, when I first started making a list of, podcast guests that I wanted to have on the show, Joe Sanok was honestly #1. And so I'm I'm kind of geeking out over here that I have him on the show right now. And just so you guys know, I've been on Joe's email list, probably 3 or 4 years, because a couple years ago, I honestly thought that was the direction that I wanted to go into, was private practice. And as I've shifted and pivoted my skill set, I found the world of podcasting and creating continuing education units or credits for talk therapists. It's shifted for me. And I wanted to bring Joe on today because I think his story and where he was, where he is now, and where he's going is just fascinating. And also being able to kind of, take something from so far in 5 years is just incredible. So welcome to the show, Joe. I'm so excited to have you.
Oh, Lisa, I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. So could you share with our listeners, how did you decide to become a talk therapist?
Yeah. Oh, man, that goes back to 2nd grade. So my dad, he's a school psychologist. And so that was always something that I was interested in. And when it was like, take your son to work day, I'd go with him to the schools, but I'd have to sit in the hall while he did the clinical work. But I saw a lot of freedom in that because he would be at one school, then he'd go eat his lunch at a park, and then he'd go to another school. So psychology was always kind of on my radar. So in in undergrad, I majored in psychology, but then realized that it was kind of limiting to the things I was interested in. I've always had this sort of philosophical, deep thinker side. So I also majored in comparative religion. And so spent some time, I got a grant to travel through Northern Ireland and write a children's book in undergrad. And then went in the year between undergrad and grad school, I took a year off because I kind of hated learning by the end of it. I thought, if I'm going to go to grad school, I should probably enjoy learning. And so I went to Nepal for a while and Thailand, and then went to Haiti and got to study with a voodoo priest for a while and worked at a shelter for people with AIDS in New Orleans. And really just opened my eyes to just, appreciating life and pushing ourselves to think differently. And so, all through grad school, I knew I didn't want to be a school psychologist, but I'd always enjoyed the outdoors. And so kind of experiential approaches to therapy was more what I was drawn to. And so I'd pictured that being a backpacking therapist where, you go in the woods with these at-risk kids. And I'd done that all through undergrad, worked with runaways and kids in really difficult situations. But I realized that having a family and being married was not going to be very conducive to being gone for 30 days at a time. So that's where I kind of shifted and brought experiential approaches into the therapeutic work I was doing. So I started a sailing program where I took kids sailing with a licensed captain. We did therapy on the sailboat for a good 4 or 5 years and got some grants to cover that, and saw pronounced change in these, young people. And so my career, and we can go into each aspect of it if you want to, I think the big kind of thread is people not realizing just how amazing they are, just how they are. Right. And so even my work with therapists now as a consultant and podcaster, I go beyond just teaching you how to make money. It's like, I want you to live a better life. I want you to work fewer hours. I want you to go after big passions and big ideas and things outside of even just sitting in a chair and doing therapy. If that's launching a podcast or launching an e-course or somehow impacting the world in a pronounced way, to me, that idea that whether it's, spiritual traditions or just ways of living where we leave the earth in some way better than we found it, I would say is core to kind of all of the work that I've been doing.
Wow, that's incredible. What a mission. What a mission. And when you have a big mission like that, when you have a big why, you see things differently. You see business differently. You see entrepreneurship just differently. You see possibilities differently. And I think that's the theme that I'm so drawn to you for, is that's been the theme throughout your emails and throughout what I've seen you do over the past couple of years. It's like you just keep, it's not that you're reinventing yourself. You're just finding new things to do with your skill set. And it's just about your big why. So would you say that your big why is make an impact, leave the earth in a better place than when we came into it, kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that's part of the big why. I'm definitely not someone that has these 5-year plans. And I know a lot of kind of big speakers will have that. If I had guessed where I would be now 5 years ago, I would have played way too small. I mean, the way I think about my work, and I think that's helpful for our listeners, is to just think about what's my personal next step that's going to stretch me, but then also can my audience come along with me? And so, a number of years ago, I tried to launch this consultant school, which was aimed, I did this 80-part podcast series to try to build momentum, got really big names like Pat Flynn and John Lee Dumas and Chris Ducker on that, thinking that was going to, really help people. But I didn't look at my audience and where they were at. And they were struggling to even have a private practice. And so they weren't going to jump to become a consultant at that point. Mm-hmm. So I really had to kind of back up to my audience and say, a few years ago, how do I help support people just starting and growing a practice? And then, if I want to help people launch big ideas, well, they have to figure out how to free up their time. And so how do they free up their time? They add clinicians to their practice. They build multiple streams of income. Now they have that free time to launch the podcast or launch the e-course or something else without worrying about the financial side. Mm-hmm. And so as I've kind of built my audience up and there's more and more people that are kind of at the top, then I can also teach them those kind of big next steps. And so, recently we just bought podcastlaunchschool.com, and we're going to be launching an e-course specifically around helping people, launch successful private practice or launch successful podcasts. And so just like, what's that big kind of stretch goal for the year, but then also making sure that I'm maintaining what I've already started and outsourcing that to other people to keep it going.
That's really cool. I like how you plan. I mean, really, not having a 5-year goal or a 5-year plan really does allow you to use your creativity and just think, what would your audience like? What do they need most? And then how can you best support and guide them? I'm really curious about your story and because I have a lot of listeners who are sitting in an office right now. Maybe they're on their lunch break and they're dreaming of doing different things. They're dreaming of doing something unique and different. And I got to be honest, when I hit 45 last year, now I'm 46. When I hit 45, I was like, oh, I'm kind of burnt out. I've got a good job. We're paying our bills. We're doing all right. But I wanted to do more. I wanted to take my skill set and just pivot and try something new and different. So can you share your story a little bit, maybe kind of going into the depths of, what spurred you and kind of set you on this path of entrepreneurship versus just sitting in a chair and doing client work all day?
Absolutely. Well, before I go there, the 6, 7, and 8 of your decade are said to be the happiest part of your decade. So the 46, 47, 48 is said to be the happiest part of your decade. So, you're about to enter the happiest part.
I feel it. I do feel it. I feel like there's been a shift. I do. Definitely.
Yeah, because I just turned 40 in December. And so I'm like going through the whole, I just did a triathlon and doing all these like big goals. Oh my gosh, I'm 40.
No, I hear you. I totally get it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, let's back up a little bit. So 2012, I was working at a community college and I had kind of this side private practice going. And, I would work a couple nights a week, after my full-time job. And I had 3 1099 contractors that were just working part-time there as well. And I realized that if I really wanted to, leave that job, which really wasn't even the plan, but I wanted to at least have options, I needed to create a stream of income that wasn't necessarily based on other people and could scale more nationally than locally or even in Michigan. Because, with most licensure, you're limited to Michigan for me, which I didn't like. And I don't like the politics that there's not a universal license, but that was too big of a battle for me to take on. So I started just kind of taking what I was learning in private practice and blogging about it. But 2012 was a crazy year for us. Our baby, before her first birthday, had to have open heart surgery. And in that process, I mean, she had multiple surgeries that, didn't work. And then, right before she turned one, she had one that was great and, everything worked correctly. But I think it was 2 or 3 weeks right after that, I was diagnosed with thyroid cancer. And it was like, we thought that, everything was kind of over with our daughter and then we were just going to move on. And then I went into the midst of, thyroid cancer and had my thyroid removed. And then my wife had a miscarriage. My grandma died in the midst of it. A friend of ours had breast cancer. And it really just made me pause and say, like, what am I doing here? Am I really happy in this job? And I was very happy in the job, very content. I had an amazing boss and so much autonomy, which made it even harder. It was sort of those golden handcuffs. I was at the top of what counselors could make in our area, but still maxing out at like 60 grand a year. And we had our list of things like, we'll save up $1,000 and then we'll redo this closet. We'll save up $1,000 and we'll get a more comfortable mattress. And not that it's always about the money, but also, money opens doors in a lot of ways. And so I wanted to be able to define more of my schedule. I wanted to be able to define my income. And in the midst of that, what was really crazy is that, the colleges, the way that they were doing their healthcare and their pension for people that had already retired, the amount we had to contribute kept going up. And I was getting, if I was lucky, a 1% raise, which doesn't even keep up with inflation. And so I noticed that my private practice and this kind of consulting podcast and website was starting to take off a little bit. And I still remember there was this one day I had upgraded my office to a 4-office suite with a view of the water. And this is still my side gig. I'm going there on lunch hours. I'm going there after work. And now I have 5 clinicians that are working for me. And I left my corner office view of the water part-time private practice and was going back to my basement office that had no windows at the community college. And I'm walking down the stairs into this dungeon of a basement. And I realized I made more money working 10 hours a week outside of this place than I did in my full-time job. Like, what would happen if I gave 20 or 30 hours to that? And I really started to think differently. And what was tough is both my parents worked for the school systems. Both my in-laws, my father-in-law, mother-in-law worked for the schools. So the entire narrative of my life had been work hard, get into the honors college, go get a double master's degree, do all these things so someone else hires you and sees you worthy enough to be a supervisor, or maybe even, if you're lucky, an executive director that makes 80 grand a year and has all the stress of a nonprofit. And so, even my parents, and now they've said that they were wrong, which, that rarely happens with adult parents, but they even said, what are you doing? Like, you have, a state pension here, you have, a solid income, you're going to leave this job. And when our second child was born, I took the Family Medical Leave Act and basically worked 20 hours a week to pay for health insurance to see if I could make it work. And every month was the best month I had had financially. And, I gave my boss notice, and that was a little more than 5 years ago.
That's incredible. That's incredible. And you've been through so much. So thank you for sharing, your history a little bit. I didn't know that. Or if I did, I didn't know it to that extent. So thank you for bringing us into that. Okay. So you leave the community college and then you're full-time in your private practice, but you're working less hours, but making more money. Is that correct?
Yeah. I was working about 20 hours a week at that time.
Okay. So I'm sure that a lot of listeners are wondering, like, okay, well, I have a full-time job and I do private practice on the side. And how did you build that? How did you, are you in a small town? Did you have a good referral network? Like, what did you do to kind of get your private practice, like, really going?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of really important things. We are in a smaller town in northern Michigan, has about 50,000 people. It's a tourist town on the water. So it has some, kind of an affluent sector, but then it also has a kind of service industry sector as well. So I decided early on to be a private pay practice. And, at the peak of the number of clinicians we had 11 private pay clinicians there. And the thing about at least having private pay as part of the equation is it forces you to say to yourself, how do I make sure I'm worth it? So if you're going to charge, more than what an insurance will charge or give you, then how are you going to make yourself worth it? Also, we had a strong referral network, but in most towns, your website is going to be the number one thing that attracts your ideal clients. Most counselors in any town, you look at their website, and it's terrible. It's these like gross clip arty, what a bad website looks like. So it didn't take much, so I invested probably 8 years ago. So even before I was, leaving the community college, in having a web designer update our website, I said, I want it to kind of look like Instagram. I want it to have this kind of like filtered look and kind of cool look. And it was really at the time, and still is, a really good quality website. And then we spent a ton of time working on SEO, blogging, internal linking, external linking, so that we could rank high in Google for a number of search terms. And just some of the kind of tactical things, using Google Console, using meta descriptions, focusing in on your keywords, installing different extensions in Chrome can help you see what are the keywords that people are searching for in your area, so that you can organically rank for those things. Google's not going to charge you if you're organically ranking. And so doing that kind of work on the front end will just give you long-term rewards.
So I'm sure there's somebody out there listening besides me wondering, how do you do that? Do you hire somebody? Is that something that you can go and take a course in? Because I know a lot of therapists, they want that, but they don't have time to learn it. How do you outsource that?
Yeah, Jessica Tapana is she's a therapist in Missouri who is a self-proclaimed technophobe. And she just started doing a lot of SEO and meta descriptions at Slowdown School last year. And then from there were so many clinicians that were like, I will pay you to do this. She actually launched a business and then joined one of my mastermind groups around big ideas. So she has a company called Simplified SEO Consultants that I would highly recommend. They have a done for you way to do it, but then also they can teach you through kind of individual sessions on how to do it yourself. And so they've taken a very kind of user-friendly way to learn. So I'd say going through one of her courses would be really worth it. But even just learning, how do you write a meta description? How do you internally link? Installing Yoast on your WordPress website. Those are really little things that when you don't know them sound crazy complicated, but there's a million YouTube videos out there if you don't want to hire someone to do it. But I think your question goes to the root of, how do you value your time? Is it worth it to spend 20 or 30 hours watching YouTube videos to learn how to do SEO, which you don't want to do anyway? If you want to, that's one thing. But if you're like, I just want to do this to be better in business, that's 30 hours that you could have been blogging. That's 30 hours that you could have been networking. That's 30 hours that you could have spent doing anything else rather than learning something that someone else loves doing and will probably do it better than you for, a handful of dollars. So in general, if you don't want to do it, you should definitely outsource it.
Oh, I'm going to be contacting her because that's something for my website. Because I think you use Bluehost and WordPress, right?
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So do I. So I have Bluehost.
Yeah, I actually upgraded from Bluehost because we just had so much traffic that we needed a dedicated server and a dedicated IT team. But, if I was still at the kind of under 1,000 visits a day, then I would definitely stay with Bluehost.
Okay. Because that's who I use right now. And I know I get back there and I'm like, what does this mean? Why is it yellow? How do I get to green? No, you're right. It's all about how you value your time. Now I could have easily learned how to, well, not easily, because that would have, nothing's easy. So I hired somebody to do my website. And then some people say, well, do you, edit your own podcast? I'm like, heck no. I knew right away that is not something I wanted to fuss with. So I outsourced that. There's the two things that I knew right away. But I like how you say, what you value your time, where can you best be spending your skill set and your energy, for your business. I think that's so wise. That's awesome. So Joe, what do you wish you had known before you started out?
Yeah. So I think with big ideas, and so I would lump anything outside of a private practice, and whether someone, is a clinician or not and listening to this, that would be, what's going to stretch you that you're not really sure if it's going to work, but inside of you, like you've got to get it out. So these big ideas, the first thing I would really just walk someone through is sketching out the transformation that you hope to see in the world. And so if you had 10 of your ideal clients that were like, I'm going to buy something from you, don't fall in love with the product, because the product will reveal itself when you have the right audience in front of you. Fall in love with the ideal client. So what's that transformation that they're going to experience? So one of my consulting clients, she has a website called Empowered and Unapologetic. And so she teaches women that have become moms and that have kind of lost their womanhood through that process. They just are feeling just stuck. So she hosts retreats. Veronica hosts all sorts of kind of Facebook challenges. So she focuses on the transformation. She wants women to feel like, they're back. I'm back. I'm not just a mom. I'm not just a wife, but I am me, and I'm empowered and unapologetic. So she falls in love with that ideal client and that transformation. How she does that, she then listens to her audience. And so she hosts, these 2 or 3 week challenges where she'll say, here's 10 things that I want you to try to do. Anyone that does 5 of them, you're in for a drawing, from this challenge. And then they all kind of get all amped up over it. So those are the kind of things that are really practical ways of engaging with your client. So many people will fall in love with, oh my gosh, I'm going to build this e-course. They'll sketch out the entire e-course, but they'll never even talk to someone that's their ideal client. So when you have a big idea, I think it's good to really just start audience building in general. So that could be as simple as pulling out your phone and doing an Instagram story every single day. To get really active on one social media, get some feedback from people, then maybe even just say, hey, I'm going to offer 10, 15-minute phone calls to anyone that wants to talk more about whatever your big idea is. So then you're picking the brains of the very people that really want to potentially buy something from you in the future. We're all buying things all the time, and we make these buying decisions based on what we think is going to help us. And so we don't care about someone's story unless it somehow speaks to us. If we see ourselves in that story, that's when we connect with that person. We might buy their e-course because it's going to speed up our progress. We've really switched in regards to how consultants and big ideas launch from being just giving information to saving time. All the information is out there, but an e-course, a webinar, a mastermind group, it's really saving time in some way. And that's really kind of that Web 2.0 that is helping people in a different way. So if I was starting over, I'd start with audience building. I'd start with really engaging with my audience, really making sure that I was looking at the best use of my time. And then early on, I would start to outsource some things, because for 15 or 20 bucks an hour, you can hire awesome designers and awesome video editors. I have 3 people in South Africa that are amazing and help me continue building things. And so I have these systems set up so that it can build outside of my own time that I'm working.
Awesome. Ooh, I like that. That's really smart. Really, really smart. I like that. This episode of The Therapy Show is sponsored by my favorite fitness apparel, Zaya Active. I recently discovered Zaya Active when I went looking for high quality and premium workout clothes. Just like those luxury store and catalog brands, yet I wanted a budget-friendlier price tag. I love this brand because number one, I live a very active lifestyle. I hit the gym about 5 days a week. Plus, I love to go for runs and long walks, which I consider to be my very important self-care and podcast listening time. Plus, the endorphins I get from my workouts keep me in my happy mental space. The clothes stay put. I'm not constantly pulling on my leggings or tugging on my sports bras, and they accentuate me in all the right places. And number two, when I work from home, I love to be comfortable in leggings, also known as yoga pants, and a tank top. Plus, I can transition to running out the door to pick up our girls or run errands while still looking put together in my athleisure styles. My favorite workout leggings are the light and tights, and my favorite everyday wear are the everywhere pants. I literally wear them everywhere, every day. I can even wear them to business meetings or client consultations. I can dress them up or down easily. Want to learn more? Head over to lisamustard.com and click on the Activewear page. You can learn all about Zaya Active, the mission, the clothes, and see if they are a fit for you and your active life. From weight training to running to Zumba to yoga to CrossFit to bar to walking to tennis, Zaya Active has you covered. And don't forget about the active men in your life. They have an amazing men's line, plus clothes for active kids too. That's Zaya like papaya active. So see my site for all the details. Okay, let me just pivot a little bit here. What do you think is your unique skill or skills that has helped you become successful?
That's a good question. I think that I go back and forth between really sprinting or killing it and slowing down. I mean, my 2 conferences, I have Killing It Camp and then I have Slow Down School. That idea of kind of optimizing my brain by slowing down, I think is really important. And so I take every Friday and Monday off. I might check email for half an hour, but I have 4 days off every single week. And then on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, I run full tilt. Thursdays are usually my creative days where I get interviewed by people or I work on YouTube videos like I did today. I batch recorded 3 podcasts today. And so being able to really say, like, when am I on and when am I off? And what does that off look like? So I say that, which also kind of touches in on that mixture between art and science. I didn't realize it was a skill, but I think that I have that creative side, and a lot of creatives are kind of flaky, and not that they all are, but I mean, you guys all know like the artsy types that kind of can't even, figure out where their car keys are every day, or the kind of scientific minded person that is so impersonable at times that they aren't able to kind of access that creative side. Somehow I was granted kind of both sides of the brain with that.
That's cool. That's awesome. What skills and gifts you have. That's really nice. And I love how you take 4 days off. And I remember your slowdown school when I was listening to your podcast and you were talking about all the things you were going to do. And you just wrapped that up, right? That just happened.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That was late July. So next slowdown school is the last week in July. And so people fly in, and for 2 days we go hiking and get massages and hang out on the beach. And then for 3 days we run full tilt towards their business. And I mean, to see the breakthroughs that they have, we do these 20-minute sprints where people really like genuinely run full tilt. And some of the comments were, man, I got more done in 3 of those sprints than I get done in a week. And I'm like, yeah, that was just an hour of your time. And you got more done in that time. And so people really learn how to kind of do that push and pull that I live every single week.
That's really cool. And then you've got Killin' It Camp coming up.
Yeah, Killin' It Camp is in October 2019. We're probably going to do it in 2020 as well. We have right now 121 people coming. We've got some great sponsors like Therapy Notes and Brighter Vision and Practicat. And it's really going to be this 3-day conference for people that really want to kill it in private practice and kind of go after that big lifestyle.
So that's for private practice folks. They want to.
It is. I mean, it can be like coaches, chiropractors, massage therapists, traditional counselors. I think anyone would get a lot out of it because we're talking about a lot of kind of just business principles, but primarily it's in the context of private practice.
So let's say if the person is a therapist but doesn't want to be focusing on private practice, would that be slowdown school, where that's more like the big ideas kind of thing, where you help them with that?
Yeah. So I mean, if they want to focus more on big ideas, e-courses, podcasts, that would definitely be slowdown school. So slowdown school is for people that have one or both of those things. So they may be just big ideas, they may be just private practice, or they might be both. And then we put them into small families that are kind of focused on the same goals as them.
So you work with folks outside of the therapy world in terms of, okay, because you mentioned
I've had some very interesting types of consulting clients. I had an online Taekwondo company that hired me. I had this guy who taught people how to ecologically store oil and gas underground. And so he started this oil and gas school. And I mean, his first year, he made $60,000 off of $10,000 in consulting with me, and has continued to do that without doing ongoing consulting. And so, yeah, I have some real estate agents that work with me. So, yeah, quite a few people outside of just the private practice world.
How do they find you if they're not in private practice?
Let me think. Those have been more personal referrals. So usually someone that follows my podcast or my work, someone will know someone and say, oh, you should talk to Joe Sanok. He focuses on private practices, but I think this would really help. And then usually when they hear about my lifestyle, they go, oh, I definitely want to learn how to do that.
Yeah, I want to learn. I might have to sign up for something with Joe.
You totally should sign up for our Big Ideas Mastermind group. I mean, that's all these people that are doing huge things and kind of mega influencers. So, I mean, it's so cool to see these small groups of 6 or so people that meet twice a month. And just, I mean, it's hard to not oversell it because I just see this impact over and over of people's lives completely being changed. My attorney says I can't guarantee it, but I'm like, I just keep seeing it over and over. Can't I guarantee it?
Yeah. Well, I think you can't guarantee it, but you definitely have the know-how and the wisdom and the support and the guidance to help people get there. It's all about, will they take the action to make it happen? I mean, you can only do but so much. So disclaimer taken. I totally get that. So how did you shift into doing the Big Ideas consulting? How did that kind of evolve? Like, what was that like for you?
Yeah, I kept getting people that were doing individual consulting with me that wanted to do kind of bigger things. And this is all public knowledge. So like Clay Cockrell, he has onlinecounseling.com. A number of years ago, he did consulting with me, and I helped him launch the online counseling podcast and, that online counseling directory. Mm-hmm. And then Dr. Jeremy Sharp, he has the Testing Psychology podcast, and, has really shifted into that. And so as I did that, and as I sketched out Slowdown School and more people came, more and more the people that were joining my mastermind group said, I have this private practice. And when I asked them kind of like why they wanted it to be successful, they'd say, well, and almost with some shame, I kind of don't want to do counseling anymore. I want to do this e-course, or I'd love to do public speaking around this thing. And then kind of naturally, the mastermind group started to shift where people were focusing more and more on big ideas. And really, I think it happened last year where I had some mastermind groups. It was very clear that some people had priorities around private practice and some had priorities around big ideas. And I ended up in the middle of the year separating some of those groups out to say, okay, we're going to do a big ideas mastermind. And then this one we're going to have be more private practice. And honestly, the big ideas, that's the stuff that I feel like is my sweet spot anyway. And I have Allison and now Whitney Owens and other people that help with doing the consulting with Practice the Practice as well. And they're just masters of private practice. I've now sold my practice. I'm not in that nitty gritty. And so I want to keep supporting people in that. But I keep coming up with ideas of how to use these skills outside of private practice.
Yeah. What's next for you? I know you said you don't have 5-year plans, but what are you excited about right now? Or what are you curious about right now?
The biggest thing, we bought podcastlaunchschool.com. And so to really help people that want to launch a podcast, the stats say that there's about 700,000 active podcasts right now. And active meaning that they've had more than 10 episodes and, that they're regularly posting podcasts. You compare that to how many blogs, there's, I think, 200 million some blogs out there and 300 million some YouTube channels. It's still the time that you can be one of the earliest adopters in a specific area. And so, when people are into something, whether it's a hobby or professionally or politically, you really can become an influencer with podcasting really quickly. But I think what's lacking in a number of the trainings, and there's some great people out there that have trainings on podcasting, but usually they start with, okay, first decide the title of your practice, or of your podcast, then decide the description of your podcast, and then decide your ideal client. But I want to back up with my course even before that and say, well, why shouldn't you do a podcast? Why should you do a podcast? If you drop this $697 for this e-course when we launch it, that may save you years of your life for not doing a podcast, because there's some people that I would say, I don't know if you should do a podcast. And then we're going to walk into kind of the specific structures of different kinds of podcasts. So people can think through, well, what structure do I want? And walking through, do I want to do interviews, solo shows, micro shows, long form shows? And then we're going to walk into kind of now what, like, how do you take people from just listeners to then whether, your call to action is join my Facebook group or my e-course or my email list? Like, how do you take those listeners from just kind of being passive to becoming a part of your community? And then we actually talk about the actual logistics of setting up a podcast, because that's where most people start is, okay, buy this microphone, get this way to record interviews, sign up for Zoom. But it's like, well, should Lisa even start a podcast? Like, could she meet her goals in a different way? Why don't we back up a little bit here? And then once we get going, how do you market it and keep it going and keep building an audience over time? And so, our hope is that, through the tutorials and everything that, people will first really determine, should I do a podcast? And then if they do want to do it, that it'll be highly successful.
Awesome. I'm signing up.
Yes. Awesome.
I'm coming on.
Yeah. So just so you know, so podcastlaunchschool.com, right now it's a first access list. So people that do want first access to it, that's where they go. And then eventually we'll have, webinars and sales pages and kind of your traditional funnel. Right now it's, early bird. We're hoping to launch it in kind of late 2019.
Oh, awesome. So it's coming pretty soon.
Yeah. I actually right here have the entire sketch on my wall of the entire course. So
very exciting. That's so exciting. And I agree with you. People were just like scratching the surface of podcasting. It's such an amazing platform.
Well, and it's crazy when you look at like the age breakdown. And so I think it's only 9% of people over the age of 65 listen to podcasts. So you think about, even like if my dad was like, starting a podcast, talking about things that, retirement folks are thinking about, that's eventually going to be a huge audience because every new car has podcasts enabled on that car. Mm-hmm. Alexa, you can just say, hey, start this podcast. And so I think eventually, like every technology, it's going to trickle down to the older age group, but the people that are already there are going to be the ones that just dominate that market.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I agree. And I feel like there's so much that can happen right now with podcasting. It's really, really exciting. What is something that you have failed at? And maybe you briefly touched on it when you were talking about the 80 podcast course you created.
For me, I think that I wouldn't say I failed from it. So that's, I think, a big difference between what I've seen. And at the time I saw it as a failure, but something that I've really learned is those that are successful view everything as an experiment, and those that aren't really have a pass-fail mentality. I'm not saying you have that in your question. Sure. But, I got a lot of information about my audience, but I wasted a whole lot of time. So I had 80 podcast episodes for the How to Become a Consultant podcast. I then tried to sell this e-course, and it was like a live kind of course, Q&A plus course. Took tons of time. I sold 6 spots into it. They were really high-end spots though, so it was several $1,000s. So I paid myself for it. But what I really learned from that is to test things out with your audience before you put too much time into it. So Podcast Launch School, I'm super passionate about it. I'm excited about it. I think it's going to be amazing. But I also want to make sure that people are opting in to say, hey, I want first access. And so if I have 2 people opt in after all this talking about it, I'm going to either have to say, well, I need to run some Facebook ads or do some webinars or teach my audience why podcasting is important, or I need to just move on to something else versus I build out an entire e-course only to try to sell it to people that don't want to be sold to.
Yep, exactly. I love how you answered that question because I don't believe that failure is a learning opportunity. It's a growing edge. It's not something that you walk away with your head hung low and go, oh, well, poor me, it's not going to happen. It's okay. What did I learn from that? What can I do moving forward? How do I pivot? How do I restructure and move forward? Okay. So what's a question you get asked a lot by people who are wanting to pivot or expand their business?
How do I work 3 days a week? I mean, I think that's, really grabs people because, you think about when there's Labor Day or Memorial Day and people are like, ooh, a 3-day weekend. I'm like, ooh, I live a 4-day weekend, and so I get that question a ton.
Yeah. So that's what they want to know is how do I do it? What do you usually tell them?
I think part of it is really looking at what's essential for you to do and what you can outsource. And so, Sam in South Africa, both of them really support, what I'm doing. I have someone that goes through my emails and stars only the most important ones for me. And she knows to text me and say, hey, so today I got a text from her with a screenshot of one of these emails asking me to be part of this virtual summit that John Lee Dumas and some other people are a part of. And that's exactly the kind of thing I should get texted over and not have just sit in my email. And so creating these systems so that when I have ideas, I can really quickly work on them and pass them off to someone else. And so to be able to text Sam as I'm going to bed and they're 6 hours ahead of me, it'll be done when I wake up. And so, even today when I had the YouTube videos, my daughter went to summer camp with flip-flops on. She's supposed to wear closed-toed shoes because they run through the woods and they do all these things. So I could have just gotten in the car and drove over there, gave her shoes and drove back. But as I was driving, I was brainstorming how I wanted this whole YouTube series on raising your rates to go. So I turned on my voice to text. I wasn't looking at my phone, but I was just talking into it and creating this whole thing. By the time I got home, I had 3 of the 4 videos sketched out. I texted it to myself so then I could put it onto my computer because I was using my phone to do the video because I don't use my DSLR camera anymore because the phone's just as good in smaller space. And so I find ways to optimize my time. If I'm going to be working, I want to work and I want to make sure it's the most efficient time and the best use of my time. And everything else, I need to say, why am I doing this when I could have Sam, or Jessica work on this? And so going through that filter, it takes time, especially on the front end, because Jessica just came on, 6 weeks ago. Mm-hmm. So every day in her first 2 weeks for 15 minutes, we would do a phone call on feedback, questions to make sure that things weren't falling through the cracks, to make sure she had feedback and that feedback was just part of how we talked. Mm-hmm. And so by doing that, now she's pretty autonomous. We do maybe a 15-minute call a week and she only gets texts on if something needs to be adjusted. And so when you do that, you set very clear boundaries on your time and allow yourself to then have that time outside of your work schedule. And then when you come back, you're energized, you're ready, you have all these ideas, and you can just sprint rather than kind of ease into the workday.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. That's awesome advice. Thank you for giving me that. I'm taking notes and I totally get it. Just when you said, you got invited to be on a webinar with John Lee Dumas, I almost dropped my mouth there for a second. I was like, whoa, we all know who he is, right? How did that relationship come about? Like, how did you get in I don't want to, maybe it's invited, or how did you network into something that big? That's big.
It was an interesting, when I first had Pat Flynn, John Lee Dumas, and Chris Ducker on my new podcast, it was first Pat Flynn. That's how I was trying to think how it was. So I noticed at that time that Pat Flynn was really active on Instagram talking about social kind of things in his life. And I recognized, and it was kind of stalker, but I recognized that he would post around a certain time each day. And so I sent him I first posted a video and then tagged him on it, and then also sent it as a direct message to him saying, hey, Pat, I'm launching this How to Become a Consultant podcast. You've helped me go from, I think it was $0 to $10,000 a month, since I started listening to you. Would you be one of my first guests on this? And he said yes, which then made it a lot easier to then go to John Lee Dumas and say, hey, Pat just said yes. And then Pat and John, I know they all hang out. And so then I went to Chris Ducker and was like, hey, Chris, I know you and Pat and John, I'll connect. I hate to name drop, but I would love to have you three on the first one. So that's how that first started. Mm-hmm. But at that point, I think people overestimate having influencers on their podcasts. Like, I'm happy to be on your podcast, but it's usually your own personality that really makes a podcast continue. It's kind of the Oprah effect. She had all these famous people on initially, but then through that, she became the famous one because of how she analyzed it and thought about things. So then, really, I think it was investing in coaching with Jamie Masters from The Eventual Millionaire. She really helped me sort out why people would buy Slow Down School and why they wouldn't, and how to do that. And that relationship, I would say, has genuinely turned into a friendship. I mean, we text each other. When I was down in Austin, I took her and her boyfriend and some other people out for dinner. And so then you move past just like this consulting relationship and you genuinely get to know that person. And then I think what kind of happens is you start to then build that momentum and you can ask bigger names. And a lot of it's just chance. So do you know who Daniel Pink is? He's the business author.
That was in your email. That one that you sent.
He just spoke in Traverse City at the National Writers Series. I was going to stand in line to meet him and ask him if he'd be on the podcast, but it was a long line and I wanted to go out for drinks with my friends and our kids weren't with us. So let's just go out for drinks.
Right.
We went out for drinks. The next day, my wife is in a coffee shop and sees Daniel Pink. She walks up to him and says, my husband has a podcast. Would you be on it? And my wife is not like the extrovert like I am, where I'll walk up to almost anyone and do that. She's definitely someone that thinks through how she's going to come across. So it was such a bold move for her. So she got Daniel Pink's personal email, and I just interviewed him earlier this week. And so that's going to go live, in a bit. But it's a mixture of those kind of relationships and honestly just reaching out to people and asking. More times than not, I'd say that influencers say yes. I've been trying to get Marie Forleo on. I say every year or so I drop an email to her team and every year they reject me. This time I did a personalized video saying, here's why I want you on here. And every year I get rejected. And I may never interview her, but you know what? Who knows? I'm going to be in San Diego soon. And there's some people out there that I know are connected to Amy Porterfield and Rick Mulready, and maybe we can connect. And so you just got to put yourself out there, and, we're all people. And so we just want authentic relationships and not people that just want to kind of feed off of us. And so I think if you come across that way to influencers, it's a lot easier to get kind of into their circles.
I like that. Thank you for sharing. That's so smart. And I like how you kind of said you stalked him on social media. I think that's genius, because you figured out his schedule and you knew what to do. And I think that's so smart. So you are definitely on social media. I feel like I see you in a lot of different places. What's your favorite social media platform where you feel like you make the biggest impact?
I think favorite is different than impact.
Okay.
So I'm a little bit addicted to TikTok right now. I haven't posted anything on it. It's so ridiculous. There's a lot of little short videos on there that are just stupid, like girls crying about their boyfriends and stuff. But some of the art videos on there, or people jumping off of swings in reverse, and it's just entertaining. So I don't know if I'm even going to get active on there. I don't even know how to post on there. I'm so old.
You and my 11-year-old would get along famously, because that's exactly what she watches on TikTok, are art and the silly dancing, hurting yourself, falling off things. So
the art that some of these people do, I'm like, how do you even come up with that? So for me, that's just kind of just entertaining. Honestly, Pinterest is our biggest impact. We have over 500,000 unique visitors every month to our Pinterest page, which is amazing, because a lot of it, most of it's passive for me, where I'll do a podcast and then Sam will make an image and post it on there that kind of reflects the podcast. And then, Pinterest is just kind of, you'll have something that you posted 3 years ago that some influencer repins, and then all of a sudden you get a big uptick. So Pinterest is definitely where we have the most impact. But, our membership community, Next Level Practice, is all on Facebook, but then we also have Teachable and, kind of e-courses off of that as well.
Oh, that's cool. So you are on TikTok, then are you on?
Don't search for me on TikTok, because I'm just it's ridiculous.
I think that's awesome though. I did not expect you to say TikTok at all. I really did. Awesome. Well, this has been such a fun interview. Thank you so much for saying yes and coming on. I mean, I'm like bucket list interview right here. So thank you so much, Joe, for your time. Is there anything
Yeah.
else like you want to share? Where should people go find you if they want more Joe in their lives?
Yeah. So if you're starting a practice, head on over to practicethepractice.com/start. We have a 28-step checklist that will help you start your practice. If you want to join our membership community or just hear more about it, that's over at practicethepractice.com/invite. If you're more kind of growing or going after big ideas or want to grow a practice, I'd say head on over to practicethepractice.com/apply. And you and I will jump on a phone call. We'll talk about a mastermind group or consulting. And then if you're even considering launching a podcast, or if your podcast is struggling and you want to have it grow faster, Podcast Launch School is coming out in late 2019, early 2020. We're going to be doing a bunch of webinars and support around that as we launch it. So I'd say podcastlaunchschool.com is another great spot. We're on all the social media.
Wow. Okay. And thank you again. One more question. What are you most excited about, like moving forward personally in your life?
Yeah, I was excited / terrified to do this sprint triathlon that I did last week. And so I feel like I had so much anxiety over that because I went from being a ridiculously terrible swimmer to being just a really bad swimmer. And I survived it. And so I haven't really regrouped to figure out what the next kind of personal goal is. I think right now, seeing Christina, my wife, really kind of go after like who she is outside of being a mom and a wife. It's been fun because she's signed up for Veronica's retreat out in San Diego, and she's doing all these other things to grow. I mean, that's fun to see because, the stronger that my partner is, the stronger we'll be together. So I'd say just supporting her in that. I mean, it's been awesome to watch her push herself.
That's awesome. Oh, that's so nice to hear you say you're excited about your wife's, growing and evolving. So what is this? What is she going to go do? What is the name of it?
Yeah, the Empowered and Unapologetic Retreat. So yeah, if you're on Facebook, that's one of my consulting clients, Veronica. She is Empowered and Unapologetic. It's this awesome women's Facebook group to help you live a life where you're unapologetically living. So
Awesome.
She's going out to that, and it's super cool to just see her kind of figuring out who she wants to be.
That's exciting. That's so exciting. Well, thank you once again for being on the show. This has just been incredible.
Oh, thank you so much, Lisa.
Well, that wraps up another episode of The Therapy Show with Lisa Mustard. I know there are hundreds of thousands of podcasts out there, and I'm thankful you've chosen to listen to mine. Be sure to visit lisamustard.com to access the show notes and discover more fantastic content. And I'd be grateful if you subscribe to the show. Thank you.